And some of it's about how we value labour as well. I mean, for all the TUC's campaigning, traditionally the labour share in the United Kingdom has been relatively high next to other countries, because we do tend to do with labour what other countries tend to do with capital. And France and Germany are just more highly capitalised countries than we are. And that's not a criticism necessarily.
Hello, welcome back to Wotter Future. This week we are joined by Neil Carberry. Neil is the Chief Executive of the UK's sector and professional body for recruitment and staffing. That's the REC. Beyond that, he is a general labour market geek, he so proclaims. It's so great to have you with us, Neil. Appreciate you joining us.
Absolute pleasure to be with you, Fraser. I'm really looking forward to having chat. And geeks of the world unite. We have to be completely clear that when something fascinates us, we lean right in on it. And I lock in on three things basically: labour markets, politics, and sport that's played with balls oval or round in Scotland.
Excellent. That's quite the roster. Well, let's jump straight into the question. The listeners will know it by now. What is the biggest problem affecting the world of work right now?
Right, everyone will talk to you about technology, and I'm only sort of going to talk to you about technology. I think it's technology enabled, but it's not about AGI and it's not about investment or skills or any of those things. Not to belittle that, I talk about skills all the time. There's a lot for companies to do, to think about, to get upstream on their future staffing needs. The biggest challenge is about our understanding of team. I work quite closely with a leadership group in London, though it is international, called the CSL. And when we think about a team, teams succeed on the answers to three questions. The first one is quite basic. It's, are we safe? And we've seen recently, in the case of the CBI, what happens where the answer are we safe isn't yes. That's your hygiene need. Your second question then is, are we connected? And your third question is, do we share a future together? So as someone in work, can I see that we're going somewhere that we want to go? I would argue that in businesses, we've always been really good at the first of those questions. Are we safe? By and large, British workplaces are amongst the safest in the world. And we're pretty good at the third one, because you can hand it down from our high. That's about the vision thing. It's about where are we going? The biggest problem we have right now is in answering the second question, are we connected? Not only because we're perhaps not as good as we should be at mindfully maintaining the things that help us connect, but that post-pandemic, in this hybrid working world, we are increasingly working online. We're working on at home. We're talking to colleagues as you and I are talking now, Fraser, down a video conferencing link. Those things are great if you think that work is transaction. And one of the things, I'm an industrial relations guy by background. That's why I'm still on the council at ACAS. One of the things you learn pretty quickly is the actual transaction of work. I do this work and you pay me some money for it, is a hygiene factor. It's down the bottom of people's lists. It's why, for instance, if you look at how people react to change in organizations, you can explain a lot more by how people feel about the process than actually how people feel about what they got at the end of the process. People would prefer an unfair outcome and a fair process to a fair outcome and an unfair process, slightly counterintuitively. Where does that leave us? Well, we've got more distributed workforces than ever before, facing more change from technology. This is a really hard thing to get through and remain productive. And the bit where I can slightly get a bit chuntery occasionally is when you say, oh yeah, that's great, Neil, that's all about being nice to your workforce. no, it's fundamentally commercial. It's about productivity, and it's about making sure mistakes don't happen, making sure the organization can learn, making sure the organization can focus on the long-term growth, not just getting through the day and servicing the customers on the things they're asking for right now. So all of that comes back to that one question: are we connected? And my argument would be, Fraser, that there is so much disconnection post-pandemic, post-hybrid working, advent of technology going on in our labour market, that the companies who will do well are the ones who start to think about it.
I think that's true. I think that's a really interesting designation that you've made there about technology being and these sorts of calls being very, very good for transactional relationships, but actually, you're quite right. It's not transactional. I think your point is counterintuitive as it sounds initially when you hear it, that people would prefer an unfair outcome and a fair process than a fair outcome and an unfair process. I mean, the process, I suppose, is the bit that you live through. The outcome is the thing that you pat yourself on the back or commiserate with, but ultimately it ends when you've finished your pints that evening, whether they be commisery or success. So I think that's a really interesting idea to me, that it's all about that fair process. And I think you're right as well, that this is not about happiness, or making people happy. This is about engaging people to be intrinsically motivated to want better and want more and come together to create more.
Yeah, I think that's right. And a particular challenge we used to call in I told you I was a labour market geek. In organisational behaviour literature, we call this organisational citizenship behaviour, and what you're looking for all the time is organisational citizen behaviour. And you know it when you can see it. It's the organisation where we don't go, no, that's their job or that's their job, but we go, there's a customer in trouble there. We'll just sort that out, and then we'll come back and we'll work out what we're doing next. That whole piece around. Do I understand that the effort I'm putting in here will be repaid to me, not just by the organisation, but also by my colleagues? Because some of these transactions are happening this way, not that way, in terms of what the individual members of staff are saying. We use Wotter inside the REC. Fraser, although I constantly get into trouble for pronouncing it the Scots way round. I cannot say Wotter. I have to say Wotter, and every time I say it, people have to ask me to say it again. So my apologies in advance for that if it slips in on the way through. But when we look at what we're monitoring, we're getting a real sense from staff of they're completely comfortable with their work-life balance. But on the flip side, they tell us that they are exhausted at the end of the day. What's that about? Mm-hmm. Online working, video conferencing, higher cognitive load than meeting in person. Why is there a higher cognitive load? Because in a meeting room, if you and I were sitting in a meeting room having this conversation, Fraser, I think you would be giving me more cues. I would be giving you more cues. We'd be more focused. Our communication would become more focused. And we'd have space around the edges of it to do the stuff that is about how are things. How did that game you refed on Sunday go, Neil? Badly, because I ended up arguing with the captains again. But that whole piece around connection exists around all of these conversations. So, when I'm seeing at the REC in my data, people saying it's not the hours I work, it's what's in the hours. Mm-hmm. That's a sign of how technology is affecting our connection, as well as kind of the other things that sit around the experience we've had over the last 3 or 4 years. Let's be clear, in the UK, there are many more kids out of school who haven't been able to go back post-pandemic. We're seeing that starting to play out in terms of parents in the workplace. And, at the beginning of the pandemic, we invited people into our homes. the barriers between home and work have fizzled away a little, and we're more aware of the challenges people are carrying. And we can't go back to where we're unconnected from that. We have to remain connected from that, but in a way that works for the organisation. All of it, to me, speaks to really looking after your first line managers and really training your first line managers in, what drives long-term performance, which is those relationships.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, there's a statistic that was brought up by Paul Devoy at the IIP when I saw him talk once, which was from the Chartered Management Institute about the number of accidental managers. There's 2/3 of managers have never received any manager training. I mean, that's a crazy statistic in its own right. So I think it's refreshing to hear you say there that actually that's the real crucial pinch point. If you've got the majority of the people in your company are not managers because that's the nature of organizational structure, then the people looking after those people who are there in front of them. We've all heard the massively overused statistic that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Is this really where we should be focusing on trying to get these managers to engage in their staff?
Yeah, but actually we need to engage managers as leaders as well. And leadership, I think leadership's really important here. And leadership isn't a job, it's a behavior. So leadership could be demonstrated by anyone in an organization, but it is about being able to say, hang on, what's really important here and how do we focus on that? And as leaders, I think we need to be thinking about the signals we send our managers. What do we say is important? How do we interact with people? What KPIs do we set? Because if we're setting KPIs, they are the things managers will try to maximize. And what if that maximization has less easily measured downside effects? So there's a whole piece here about the culture of success in a business that's going in the right direction being fundamentally built on connection. Because if you have that connection, it doesn't mean you're not going to set bad KPIs. It probably means you're more likely to have a culture where I can come to you and say, Fraser, this KPI you've set, do you understand the behaviours you're driving? And I quite commonly say to our team, I am absolutely at home to conflict in the workplace. I love conflict of task. I think conflict is inevitable in workplaces. Good companies learn to channel it, but I love conflict of task. I have zero patience for conflict of relationship. Yeah, yes. We pay you to be here. We can expect, as part of that, we can expect you to behave civilly to each other between 9 and 5. But actually, if you have that connection, what you're starting to do is building relationships that will bear difficult discussions. If I look at my experience, I spent a long time on the Low Pay Commission, 8 years. Now, the Low Pay Commission is a model that should fall over every year because you've got my team, the employer side, and we're coming in with a certain view of where the labour market is and what's affordable. You've got the trade union side coming in with a certain view of what's affordable, and you've got academics in the middle who are providing data and taking a view on the arguments made by the two sides. The Low Pay Commission has never failed to reach consensus on the rate of the minimum wage. Now, partially that's because there's a clear vision, so that do we have a shared future together? There's a clear vision. We want to raise the basic wage for as many people as possible without causing job losses. But it's also because the nature of the work of the Commission over the year up to the decision is that we are travelling around the country together. We have relationships that mean when it comes down to it, and I'm sitting in a room with one member of the trade union group on the other side, and we have the discussion about where can you meet me on this, that there isn't that kind of lack of trust. So a lot of this is about walking. You made this comment in response to people's lived experience on procedural justice earlier. I think this is right. People's experience of building a story together is what builds the trust that leads to the connection. That means you can have the really tough discussions, whether that's about individual performance. And I've talked to team members who I regard as personal friends, and said, I'm not sure this is where it needs to be now. And it hasn't been the throw up hands moment. It's been well, let's work out where we need to take it. On the flip side of that, you can walk into a room and say, I know I said this last week, but actually, guys, I'm not sure I was right. I think we need to be over here. And the room will say, well, we're glad we're here now. So there's that sense of building the strength of relationships in your organizations that enable you to do the stuff that really needs to be done, not just to turn the wheel on the day to day.
Yes, that's interesting. I mean, so obviously Google studied this a lot with Project Aristotle, and talks about psychological safety and that being a sort of key measure of the performance of a team. I think going back to your original three, are we safe? Are we connected? Etc. That first one, we are sort of safe in a kind of legal sense. Workplace incidents are low, etc., compared to other places. I'm sure there's more that we can do, of course. But actually, I wonder on a team level, what the level of psychological safety truly is, because I've definitely worked in teams where someone comes up with an idea that isn't popular or isn't what the manager said, and all of a sudden it's how dare you, you're not a team player, and that can result in potentially ostracization. It can result in being moved out of the team, either to another team or out the company. And if the fear of that outweighs the perceived benefit, which it can very easily do because we exacerbate fears in our minds, then that's a massive barrier, surely, to this kind of collaboration that you're saying. So how do we kind of tackle that? I suppose we've talked on a kind of micro level, your team, the way that you do this, but is there a way that we can, as a nation, or even as a sort of world community, kind of, how do we find our way around that psychological barrier?
So I think when we talk about psychological safety, we also ought to talk about psychological danger, because there's not just psychologically safe spaces and psychologically less safe spaces. There are actively psychologically dangerous places. As a chief executive, I will happily say this: when I walk into the REC board, it's a psychologically dangerous place for me, not because of any position of anyone around the table, but ultimately there are 11 of us, but only one of us has executive responsibility. So we have a shared responsibility for where the organisation is going, but actually delivering it is mine. Yeah. The triumph of our board and the work of our chair, who is excellent, is actually it's a psychologically safe space. But you have to acknowledge the psychological danger to work towards the psychological safety. The most important thing in an organisation for me is about helping people read the signposts. And as a chief exec, particularly, but as any leader or manager, you are constantly putting up signposts. And they are pointing people into a direction, which is, how do I know how Fraser will react to that? Well, this was something similar, and here's how he reacted then. And actually, that was all right, so I'll go for it. As opposed to, actually, no, that didn't go so well, and maybe I won't. And so there's something here about consistency. And I think about thinking about our interventions. One of the best managers I ever had in my early career said to me, a lot of the process of managing is learning not to say what you're thinking. And that sounds counterintuitive, but if you want to enable people, you need to kind of have a sense that, firstly, you don't want to stomp on the parade immediately, but also you want to realize that your gut reaction to something might not be the right reaction. So giving yourself space and time to think things through, I think the real risk for leaders and managers is that they confuse urgency with importance. And staying on the important and worrying less about the urgent is a big part of this. The other bit that I think is really important is I'm not sure we educate our managers and leaders effectively. We do some excellent management education, and more people should do it. But if you look at, for instance, the MBA in the United Kingdom, and this is a soapbox of mine, so apologies in advance for the rant that's coming. The MBA in the United Kingdom is really, really good at teaching you how to be an FD. And because of the nature of our corporate governance in listed companies, at least, being an FD is the route to becoming a chief executive. I'm not sure that the finances alone are what a chief exec should care about. One of my, at the REC, one of my standard positions is to say to a group of companies, right, okay, people are your greatest asset, yeah? Okay, you buy them like you buy paper clips. And it's true, many companies interact with their recruiters saying, I'm not giving you exclusivity. I don't want to pay more than this, and I'm choosing who I'm putting on the list on price. And I'm giving you a job spec that has been recruited on 4 times since it was written in 1987. And that by definition is not kind of looking after the people side. I think we've got a massive opportunity in the recruitment space now, because for the first time, I think chief execs are talking about people being a big priority, and they mean it. Now, a cynic might say that's because they're in such shortage. So be it. But I think there's a huge opportunity now for these people issues to be seen as the strategic issues that they are, that leadership is critical, and that actually we need to be investing in that. And that's why, if I look at the government, I think national workforce industrial strategy is essential, and a workforce strategy is a big part of that. And I think the best companies are thinking the same way. How do we get upstream and how we engage and connect our people, bring our people on? But that requires you not to think of the HR as a cost center. And I think fundamentally that's the big problem we've got in the UK. And it's only going to be tackled by enlightened chief execs speaking out and by reforming some of our management education in the MBA.
I totally agree. I think that was brilliant. Look, I'm keen to move into the kind of second sort of element here, because I think we've kind of finished off that area quite nicely. That is, it's about this connection between the teams. It's about the way that all comes together from a management perspective, from a leadership perspective, from an individual perspective, from an entire workforce. We've kind of covered a really lovely bit there. So what I'm keen to ask now is the second question. If we can fix this, what should we look forward to? Why should we fix this? What will get better?
So I am a red and tooth and claw capitalist, right? So let's be clear. If we fix this, we make a ton of cash, tax take goes up, we can fund our hospitals, pay goes up, and we're a better off country. So, at the macro level, I am not arguing this because I'm a nice guy, though I would argue that I am a nice guy. I'm arguing it that British companies could be a lot more effective. We set out that if you get your investment in technology right, you address shortages effectively in your labour force, you could add £39 billion a year to the UK economy every year. That's 2 Elizabeth lines. It's a lot of hospitals.
Yes.
And that's just getting people into post. If you can then get them engaged and get them delivering, that will increase exponentially. And we know from work the REC's done in the past that the cost of a bad hire can be multiple times the salary of that individual. Now, if you have so maybe sometimes it's not that they're a bad hire. Maybe it's that they're not effectively managed and engaged. So there's a lot there where I think there is a cash and productivity benefit to companies to getting this right, and it's really important we acknowledge that. But the second bit is businesses are really good at talking about sustainability now, and we talk a lot about ESG, which is a classic city phrase. E is environmental. We know what the climate challenge is. We know about sustainability there. Absolutely critical. G is governance, and getting governance right really matters. Transparency really matters, as events passing this year have already showed. S is a bit more thinly defined. If you go into the city, they like things they can measure. So, measuring very valid things like gender and ethnic minority pay gaps, those are numbers. They're easy to measure. But actually, I would argue that this stuff comes under the S of ESG as well. If you look at, for instance, the growth in the understanding of mental health in business and some of the challenges people are facing post-pandemic in terms of either children's mental health or their own mental health, there must be an impact on British business of the large scale ceasing to exist of our children and adults mental health service in the country. There's a lot of pressure going on to people, and if we have an understanding of that, yes, it might dip people's performance when they're going through it, but I think your retention goes up. I think people's commitment to the organisation goes up. So those are my two big answers. One is we make a ton of cash, but the second one is it actually makes our organisations more sustainable as human communities, which is what they're going to need to be.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Mental health is one that, of course, comes up a lot because it's so intangible. It's we all know it's there, but we never know quite when it's there. It's just someone's told us it's there, and we've gone, oh, okay, fair enough. When it comes to other people,
it's more obvious when someone's leg falls off, certainly.
Yes, exactly.
But I say that slightly kind of flippantly. But this is the point, right? If someone rang me up, the truth is, right? If someone rang me up and said, I can't come in this week, Neil, I've got really bad dose of the flu, that is no different. It is genuinely no different. And I think there's a big and this comes to that signal about how we react. How do we make it okay in our business for someone to say, I'm really struggling here, I've been to see the doctor, I'm not well, I need to take some time. And for our reaction to be, we care for that person as if they had a cancer diagnosis.
Yes. I think that's the really important thing here. And as you say, there's that kind of, from that true sort of capitalist viewpoint here, then, by providing that, allowing for that short-term drop in productivity that you've now lost this person, they're not able to, sort of be with you in this moment, etc., you gain the softer elements that, as you kind of alluded to there, they're difficult to measure. What is the... I've got the solution written on my T-shirt, but how do you measure whether someone agrees with the vision of the company? How do you, measure that intrinsic motivation? Whether they look forward to coming to work. Whether they feel they can collaborate with their teammates, etc. All of those things boost when you start treating people as individuals, and the ultimate result is that productivity massively increases, as you said. I mean, England does not. England's always had a productivity problem, or at least it has more recently when it comes to measurements like GDP per capita, of course. And there's plenty of reasons for that. Some good, some not so good. But there's definitely a lot of countries that sustain vastly higher GDP per capita than us, with otherwise relatively similar economic pressures and options. And so there's room for us here. There is an ability to get past this that I think is powerful.
And some of it's about how we value labour as well. I mean, for all the TUC's campaigning, traditionally the labour share in the United Kingdom has been relatively high next to other countries because we do tend to do with labour what other countries tend to do with capital. And France and Germany are just more highly capitalised countries than we are. And that's not a criticism necessarily. I remember years ago having a discussion with a boss where he had spent the night before in Dusseldorf and I had spent the night before in Cambridge, and we'd both gone to the gym that morning. And the difference is, in Cambridge I went straight to the gym from my room. There was someone on the desk at the gym at 6 a.m. and they gave me a towel and showed me round, and that was great. And on the way out I said thanks to them and went back to my room. My boss had to walk to the front desk of the hotel where he was given a key to the gym, and then when he got to the gym everything was self-service. And it's a bit like electronic shelf edge pricing in French supermarkets, which we still don't have in the United Kingdom. These things are choices, and they're choices made by companies. And if we want to change the capital mix of our economy, actually we have to change the incentives that act on companies. And this is the bit that governments don't really get. I remember I started a chapter I wrote on skills about a month back with a quote from the Leach Review, which was published in 2006. Sadly, such is the nature of the English skills system, still relevant, that about skills being a derived demand. Firms' desire for skills is driven by the choices they make on their products, the choices they make on how their products are built and their investment. And I would argue that extends to their choices in HR as well. So there are active choices we need to encourage firms to make that are about creating more higher skill, more engaged jobs interacting with the technology, and stepping up and away from perhaps some jobs where labour is filling a gap that the automation could, partially because that's a sensible thing to do in a shortage labour market, partially also because that kind of transactional relationship that you would have with someone doing that job lends itself to a certain type of management, which might not be the type of management we want to go for.
Yes, and I mean, I think the underlying thing here that I find myself sort of having to remind people of with these debates is that, you know, economies and sort of growth, whether it be wage growth or employment or anything, this is not a zero-sum game. This is not that, you know, if you get more self-service checkouts, you hire less cashiers. It is potentially true that in that very micro area that you would hire less cashiers, but we've been replacing humans with machines for 1,000 years, from, you know, plows and planting machines all the way through to industrial revolution mills, all the way through to computers, etc. And yet we have more job openings and more labour shortage than we've ever had before in human history.
We're really good at creating jobs to do things that humans do. This is the Rob McCargo from PwC point about, you know, robots aren't here to take your job, they're here to take away the boring bits of it. And I think the challenge is really about skills transition. So when we think about this change, and you're absolutely right, this has happened since time immemorial. It's happening a bit quicker now, probably.
Definitely.
And what we shouldn't belittle is the fact that there will be dislocation of people and that those people will find that transition difficult, but actually calling that out and saying, well, we need to address that as companies and governments is really, really important. Because in the past we've failed to do it. I mean, part of the challenge is that you go into communities in parts of the United Kingdom and the feedback on what you would like on economic development was, well, it was great when the factory was here, it would be good if the factory reopened. Well, that's not where we are now. But the answer is then not nothing instead. It's why, you know, even though it's not gone where it should have, the whole thing about levelling up and regional growth and really matters in terms of people's connection with work and their local economy. My view would be that piece around understanding that there is an optimistic narrative for the future of work, and then understanding that that doesn't take away from the fact that there's a duty on companies and governments to support people to get there, is really important. The answer is not to load the risk onto individuals.
I totally agree with you. I think that was a really powerful, sort of place to finish. I think, you know, if we can fix these problems, if we can move in this direction, then as you quite rightly point out, everyone benefits. We get higher wages, we get more of the things that we want and that we need as a country and as a society and even as a world population. If we can do that in a sustainable manner, then things just get better, don't they?
Absolutely, and that's what we're all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure to have you with us, Neil. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
No, absolute joy, Fraser, anytime.